classical musician by training. My first interaction with electronic music was in high school. So a friend of mine that ironically is doing the artwork for the label that I manage with my colleague Vlad Caia. His brother had a private club in my hometown where we started DJing. So that's a story about my early beginnings. And then moved to Bucharest to study music and slowly shifted into electronic music to the point where it became my job. I was already signed on Arpiar by I think my third or fourth year of university. During my master's, I was playing in the National Youth Orchestra, but also gigging. And I just had to take a decision at some point because my teacher was like, are you available to play the orchestra for this and this and this date? And I'm like, oh, sorry, I don't think so. So at some point I'm like, okay, it's either cello or DJing, and here I am. So the decision is obvious. It was harder for the family to understand at that point what I want to do because they saw a stability in playing the cello, whereas obviously this is like a freelancing lifestyle, not as easy as I could afterwards sell for myself. But it's a decision that I will never regret. So I think one of the first ones that I've ever listened to was Radu on BPM at Pro FM radio, and then Rarish I think had another mix on that, and it was also DJ Cool back then who was playing progressive. He was pretty big. We had a pretty big progressive scene before 2005, and there was another one by I think it was Lemonade at Crystal Club. Yeah, that was kind of the catalyst. Started like getting me into okay, so these are like multiple tracks, they're combining into each other and creating a groove, an atmosphere. DJing came first, so it's already 20 years now, wow. And then after I moved to university, I had a year without any kind of direct connection with like music in terms of producing or DJing. I was only focusing on university, and then I bought a computer. My dad gave me some money to buy a computer, and then I started producing around 2007. I wouldn't call it producing now, but it was something. The first serious one, yeah, it's actually it's a funny story that some people ask me, like, when did you learn how to play vinyl? So I was collecting vinyl. A friend of mine, Silvio, he got us a gig there, and I had turntables in the boarding school where I was living, but I didn't have a mixer, I didn't have a system, so I just had basically turntables laying around on my table. So I got one turntable with me, literally got it on the train to get to Sighișoara, and asked the guy who was managing the club and the party, like, can I come and practice playing vinyl in your club? So I went there at I think the party was starting at 11, I went there at 9, and I just like practiced playing vinyl and then played vinyl. I'm not sure if it was good. I don't have that recollection. Obviously a big one. It's once you have years of traveling and like playing experience, it becomes second nature, and it was certainly not at that point. And I think a lot of young aspiring DJs don't take into account the necessity of experience, or don't take it in consideration when they're like jumping ahead and maybe feel that they have enough and maybe they don't have enough, and they have expectations then that they don't meet. They feel, I wouldn't say depressed, but they feel sad for not standing up to their standards, whereas it's just, you don't have to be so hard on yourself. It's just a process, and sometimes it takes years, sometimes it takes months. It's not a linear process for anybody. It's just depending on the situation. Every track has its own character, so it can, obviously the groove is very important. There can be like certain sounds that make a track interesting and catch your attention. Over the years, I've gone through different phases of my producing career or development. For a lot of time, I was only sticking to like one recipe, and then finding out when I kind of expanded my musical taste that there's so many different ways of doing things. And then it kind of becomes overwhelming because you don't know like what should I do today? Should I do this? Should I do that? And then you kind of like refine the process where you're like, okay, maybe I'll try this today and I'll try this tomorrow. Some things make sense, other things don't make sense, but it's through that process of experimentation where you get to unique things. So to get to your point, sometimes it's a matter of luck, sometimes it's a matter of experimentation, but that's how you get to cool things that kind of catch the public's attention to your track. I wouldn't want to put myself anywhere right now. I know there's a big tendency to kind of define somebody as being this or that, and I understand it from a like human being standpoint. I think it's detrimental because there are different phases of one's life that can define who he is at that point in time, but wouldn't define him generally as a person or artist. I think it's just like an ongoing fluid process. So right now I'm experimenting with different styles. I very much like producing like down-tempo music, and I'm probably gonna do something with that in the near future. I would also like to experiment producing some sort of like indie pop. I also have like drum and bass sketches. I have all types of sketches. I know it's probably gonna come. I'm not trying to rush it, but I am trying to experiment with different things and see the level where I can get to whatever genre I'm experimenting with. Every style comes with different perks, different ways of doing things, and ones are more like complex than others. If you only look from the lens of our scene, maybe it's like that, but in a broader spectrum, everything's a mashup of anything else, you know. When it came to my learning curve, because I was classically trained and like used to playing just one instrument, technology didn't come that naturally to me. So the first big influence was my colleague Vlad, who helped me kind of introduce myself into the fundamentals of producing. Afterwards, like a lot of experimenting by myself, people that you kind of reference your sound to. In a sense, it's very good to have a mentor and a direction at first, but then just, you know, go wherever your personality or your destiny takes you to. There were definitely some memorable gigs that I will always enjoy thinking about. Well, obviously some Soundwaves editions were very special. Maybe the first gig at Robert Johnson in Offenbach, that was very special. Fabric was special. I've had special moments in every country, and it's very, after a while, it's hard to pinpoint like that was the pinnacle. I wouldn't call anything the pinnacle necessarily. I would say there are like special moments and not so special moments, and I think it's okay to have that. Because if everything was special, nothing would be special, right? So it's a constant challenge. Especially when it comes to development, it's a constant challenge, it's a constant battle with yourself. So that never ends somehow. Challenges from the outside, sometimes people understand what you do, sometimes people don't. It's all dependent on context. Obviously the scene is always influenced with like by different types, different styles. Some style would be, let's say, bigger now and not so big then. That's why I'm saying like it's detrimental to categorize something, because once you're categorized, then people say like, oh yeah, I'm bored of that sound, and maybe judge you for doing something that you're not necessarily doing or have never done, but it's just a, you know, like a psychological connection between, oh yeah, he's that, so he's probably doing this because he's friends with that guy. So yeah, that would be an external challenge. But I think for an artist or for somebody who's making art in general, it's been going on for forever. I mean, think about how somebody like Haydn, which is the classical composer, in like classical, in a very classical, so he developed the classical style of classical music. He was the precursor of Mozart, and then Beethoven they were living in the same lifespan, but Beethoven was already the first post-classical, pre-romantic. For somebody like Haydn, who wrote so much music during his lifetime, at the end of his life, he was like, I'm obsolete because this guy's coming along with a different style of music. Obviously now with technology, everything's moving way faster. It goes down from like 50 years to 10 years, but the process is the same, right? You see somebody else coming along and say like, damn, am I still relevant? So it's normal. I've recently watched a podcast about Prince by his recording engineer. And that's an interesting story because it kind of reflects what we just talked about. And he was depressed when he got 30. He was like, damn, I'm 30. Like I'm moving into another stage of my life and somebody else is gonna come along and steal my momentum. And it's like, it's Prince, you know? So if somebody like that can feel that he's obsolete, you can imagine the rest of us. Yeah, inner demons and hypes and trends and whatever the exterior throws at you. If you look at it from an ego standpoint, it depends from person to person. You're never fully in control of the entire crowd. I would call it more of a connection than control. There's some special moments where you feel very connected to everybody, where you're at the same level, but it's not control. It really depends on the context because some people are going to be there for the music. Some people are going to be there for their friends. Some people are going to be there for a social interaction. But if these 3 or 4 categories of people fill up the club and create that vibe, the people that are going to be there for a social context are going to feed off the other group's energy and they're going to create a common energy. If it's not full enough, then that magic, if you want to like call it that, is going to be missing. And I found situations where you play the same track that you would play at a festival and they wouldn't do anything to the crowd just because the energy is not there. So I've even played in situations where people would say, yeah, you played so amazing then, and this was also good, but it was not as good. And I'm like, you know, the tracks weren't so different. I'm like, no, you played completely different. I'm like, no, I know what I played. I didn't play that different. I maybe changed some tracks, but not all of them. But it's just depending on, you know, the context that they were feeling at that time. As artists, apart from the art, the connections that we establish with our colleagues and mentors is one of the most beautiful aspects of one's career. Like you get to, especially in a niche style of music, I guess it happens in pop too, but in a niche style, you grow up, you know, listening to different producers, and then you get to meet them and hang out and like share ideas, and that's an amazing aspect. Yeah, I think obviously the collaboration with Vlad is the biggest aspect of my career so far. I think I've told this story a million times, but we met over the internet and then kind of connected. He was based in Norway, so I invited him to come over. We started making music. It was a very like natural, easy process. Just decided to release and then just started a label. It all came like we did think about it, but it was a very natural process. We didn't want to be in the same place for a very long time. I was happy to hear that a lot of like younger producers were inspired by what we made. We never really thought ourselves of being like in any style necessarily. Even the first album we made, there's a couple of tracks that kind of define the album, and our favorite tracks are the tracks that nobody ever mentions, you know. Like we made like a down-tempo hip-hop track, like nobody ever listens to that. That's one of my favorite things from the album, you know. We made like a jazzy kind of like broken beat jazzy thing. Nobody mentions it. It's Vlad's favorite thing from the album, you know. So in a sense, we were always, I think, a little bit of a misfit, but then that's okay, you know. That's everybody's journey. You just roll with it. Those were like very important lessons for me, especially like when I think of our first album. There were so many tracks. We put it in 3 parts, and the first part was our favorite part in terms of like what we released on it, the music that was on it. And there was a track like a kind of a, You would even call it like a trancey track back then, when trance was like the neo trance movement was not as big as it is now. It still had a minimal vibe to it, but it was my favorite tune from that part of the album. It's too trancey, it's too whatever, and they were not happy about it. And then we released the second one, which had more accessible tracks, like you mentioned. There was one track that was like really, really simple in terms of musical content, and people were like, that track's amazing. And I'm like, how the hell do people like a track with like a 2-note bass line when that track has so much complexity inside of it? And people are like, yeah, it's just like, yeah. Everybody's perception is different. You get to learn that through experience. And I think it's very important, especially for young producers, not to get so personally involved with their work and getting frustrated that, oh, why don't people understand people understand different things in different ways depending on maybe it comes from year to year, generation, hype to hype. It's just, it's just constantly changing. One of my favorite bands, as I played you before, is Jamiroquai. And obviously they're not one of the biggest bands. They're a fantastic band. A lot of people don't know they're a band. They just think it's JK, but it's actually a big band involved. And in terms of complexity, like the tunes are, the ideas and the lyrics are simple, but there's so much musical complexity going on. Even though the idea is simple, what surrounds it is super complex. So when you think about complexity, it's, there are different levels of complexity and what people perceives as being complex or not. Misha was my university colleague and friend. We were hanging out. We were not like super close, but we were hanging out I just like randomly stumbled upon one of his YouTube videos. And I'm like, oh my God, that's my colleague Misha. He's making electronic music. Like, that's so random. He was based in Berlin at the time. I think I asked somebody for his contact. They gave me his contact and I realized like, damn, I still have this dude's phone number in my contacts. So I called him up. He came to Bucharest. We recorded the first session in Cesar studio. And like the first ever track that we did was the hit track, if you want to call it, from the first album. We just recorded 6 tracks and that was the album. And we did that in 2 days. Obviously the post-production process was longer, but yeah. So it was just organic. Everything's kind of organic and music. It just comes, it comes, Disappointed that we were being labeled just as a electronic band. We had different things that we wanted to experiment with, but unfortunately Destiny didn't take us there. Now the project is off. We're not doing it anymore. I think it's healthier for everybody to say that it's now closed. It's a past project. It was difficult, obviously, to release music on other people's labels because the scene it's closed. It's a completely different process. It's not like in like pop or rock where you make music and actually there are A&R guys literally looking for talent. You have to approach labels. It's the other way around. They only release their friends or colleagues. So we thought about making a label together, and that's how it came about. It was a platform for us to be able to release what we want. Yeah, so Cesar was also involved in this. I made a couple of tracks and passed on a CD to Cesar. I didn't know Radu at the time. We knew each other. I was going out to his shows, obviously. And he kind of knew my face, but didn't personally know me. And I think I gave the CD to Cesar, and then he gave it to Radu. And then Radu heard the tracks, and that's how I got signed. So that's why I said that Cesar was highly involved in my early years. Well, it's impossible to know what's going to happen in the future. Technology is obviously a very big part of electronic music. That's why it's electronic. But if you're talking about AI, I think nobody fully understands where it can go. I've heard music done, like produced by AI. Some people say it's gonna sound as good as a person producing it. It's obviously not at that point right now. I'm not sure if it's ever going to be. It would be wise of us to find a way of implementing it in our workflow. It could help. It depends on how open you are to using the technology or not. Some people are going to be nostalgic. Other people are going to want to jump into it. What I do find very interesting is that the younger generation, they're going to obviously pick it up because they're going to grow with it. Sooner or later, it's going to be part of the industry. It is part of the industry, but it's going to be part of maybe any small scene of music. On Sushi Tech, we're going to do a collaboration album. And that goes back to the conversation about your mentors, that we have like friends, but also mentors, like Silver Lining. We have like made a collaboration with Silver Lining and one with Jade Tripwire. And those were like things that made us very happy. We'll be working on my second part of the album, but that's taken time because, as I mentioned, my style has changed and my perception has changed and the way I work has changed. So I didn't want to rush putting something out that I wouldn't be comfortable with. I would just like it to reflect what I think I stand as an artist today. I'm not sure what it's going to be tomorrow. I will be working on a mashup of electronic and classical music. That also depends on context, because commercial success, it depends on where you think commercial success is. If you look at it from like a broader range, I wouldn't say I'm commercially successful. I'm maybe somewhat successful in a certain niche of music. If you like it or not by what's happening around you, you get influenced by the trend, you get influenced by your friends, you get influences basically from everywhere around you. So maybe that also involves your success. But in my case, I wouldn't want to say it's the most important thing. I just want to evolve artistically as much as possible. You just want to be the best version of what you can be, right? Since I'm a dad, it's challenging, but this is the first. So the studio where we are now, we just moved in. Misha has been here slightly longer than me, but it's the first time in my life where I have to go outside of my house to work. You really have to be focused. It makes you more determined and more focused in what you want to achieve, because you know there's somebody waiting for you that is growing, and it's never gonna be the same point in their lives as now. So there's really something that you want to get back home to. It's not like you wouldn't want to get back home to your wife as well, but like, you know that your kid is growing and it's the only time in your life where you're gonna see them like that. So being away is a struggle. Got involved through Misha, also by accident. He had a studio somewhere else and they sold the building and he had to move out, and through some friends he found the photographers, our neighbors here, that established this creative hub called Atelier Les Cantea, and he asked me if I would like to do the studio with him because the space was pretty big and the investment was also quite big, and it kind of took us 6 months. It's still not fully finished. We still have work to do, but it's functional at least. Obviously, he was a reference and he influenced the sound in a lot of ways. And then more and more people started experimenting and it kind of became its own thing, to the point where it was a trademark. And as I mentioned before, I don't believe in trademarks. I believe that everybody has its own direction. And when it comes to taste, to aesthetics, I feel that we're in like completely different points, musically speaking. I look at, I don't know, like producers like Don Andre. Like Don Andre is not minimal, It would be silly to kind of put them in that bucket. I've never seen myself as being fully minimal, but maybe it did have a minimal aspect to it because of the influences that you had. But I would love for people to realize that producers and artists grow throughout their lifespan, and nothing's ever the same, even in like 1 year or 2 years time, And yeah, there are some emblematic artists who could break that genre barrier. And if you mention like influences now, I would call those people my biggest influences, just because I'm amazed by the fact that they're not put in any category. They're not put in any bucket, Like somebody like Fortet, he's done like techno, he's done like down tempo, he's done like whatever, and he's Fortet, and everybody knows that that's a sound, but it's not a style. That's really impressive to me. And I think that's something that young producers should be looking up to generally. It's the artist above the style, yeah. Flowing Points is the same, I mean, there are a bunch of artists that manage to cross this genre barrier. Shows that you still need to put in the work. Like nothing's ever gonna change your career so drastically. Maybe if it's, I don't know, something so emblematic that people are gonna relate to it generations afterwards, But that also comes with chance, with experimentation. I have like selected ambient works in mind, when I think about that. When I think of an artist like Richard, Aphex Twin, who made an emblematic album when he was like 18, and people still see it as one of the most important, influential electronic albums 40 years afterward, or 30 years. Oh yeah, 30 something years, yeah. Like mentally, we like patterns. Like people work, like their memories work in patterns, their behavior work in patterns. So it's easier for somebody to patternize something. Say like, yeah, this is this, and I know it's this. I don't need to think about like too much of what it can be, and that reflects in pretty much everything, right? In the past, like anything, it comes and goes in waves. I don't want to say it's not united anymore, but I would just say it's slightly more diverse. Yeah, I would enjoy even more diversity if you ask me. Just to, I don't know, listen to acts that you wouldn't normally listen to. That's what I really enjoy about the UK, for example, that it has so much. I mean, obviously their history is way bigger, but they have so much more diversity. I'd love to go to a Floating Points concert, or listen to, I think Stingray played once at Guest House, but you don't normally have a lot of acts from different styles of music as you would want. At least, but that's just me, that's my subjective. In terms of aesthetics, I think the format of the events, every country, depending on how they would format their events, influence the sound that they played. I mean, I think it would be complicated. When Sunways came about, it was something super different because you literally had nonstop music. And imagine a party as they had in the Netherlands, where you had like different genres depending on stages and whatnot. We do have different genres now. You have something that's a little bit more techno, something that's a little bit more minimal, whatever you want to call it. But it was nonstop. I wouldn't imagine like a techno festival with 140 BPM going on for 3 days. It would be like probably like an aerobic festival. The tracks used to be longer, yeah. That depends on how everybody kind of perceives it. I like it when they're shorter. I like the kind of the movement that we're going through, where everybody's like, it's a little bit more energetic. It's a little bit more like exciting. It was exciting back then too because it was new, but it's just, yeah, it's just evolution. It's just change. So after I got signed to Arpiar, it like naturally came along. Radu had a discussion with Katalin. Everybody that was involved with Arpiar will be involved with Sunrise, and we've been collaborating ever since. I work with a different agency now, but they're still obviously a big part of the scene, and they're our friends. So I do have a different agency for the United States called Resolute, and the one that's like globally, it's called Contemporan. It's my friend Bogdan who's doing the bookings, and he also handled like obviously Vlad, Cesar, Prislea, Pico Arapu, Sabli, Charlie. So it's quite a big crew of artists that he's looking after. Almost 10 years now, maybe 2016, I think. So 8 years on, yeah. In terms of Curious Stage, the project that I'm involved now, where we are recording Singer and I'm producing a record with Misha, brought me to like the entire recording process, just different studio workflow. It's quite fascinating, like routing capabilities, vocal processing, signal chains, and whatnot. So that's quite interesting. And I still have a lot to learn when it comes to synthesis and production in general. So that's the cool thing about music, man. You always feel like a kid in a ballpark. Oh yeah, you can do this and you can do that, and you can have, yeah, you have so many different options of doing things that you're always going to have something else to learn. Just experiment. Don't you lose yourself too much in the outside influences, and work and be passionate about what you do, because results are going to come.